Well, things are relatively quiet in Lansing, but that will change after Labor Day when the legislature is back in session. The budget's been wrapped up for the year, but there are still issues to be dealt with. And this morning we'll get a perspective from a downstate lawmaker. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Now here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, I guess this morning is State Senator Tanya Shootmaker, who represents Michigan's 26th Senate District, which includes all of Allegan and Van Buren counties, and Gaines Township and Kentwood City in Kent County. For those not familiar with Michigan geography, that area is in southwestern Michigan, not quite to the Indiana border. Senator Shootmaker serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee as chairperson of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and as a member of the Capital Outlay, Community Colleges, and Judiciary Appropriations subcommittees. She also serves as vice chair of the Judiciary Committee and as a member of the Energy and Technology Committee. Senator, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
Nice to have you with us. So you grew up in southwestern Michigan.
I did. I grew up on a small family farm in southwest Michigan.
So were you, as a kid, were you involved in the farm?
I picked asparagus both before and after school, so I learned the value of a hard day's work.
Okay.
Definitely.
And you went to high school in Matawan?
Matawan.
Did I get that right? Okay. And as I pointed out, you know, you're down in the southwestern part of Michigan. So you went on and got your bachelor's degree from Michigan State, and then your law degree from the Detroit College of Law.
That's correct. When it was still in downtown Detroit. Since then, it's merged with Michigan State University, so I no longer kind of have a Detroit College of Law. It's because it's part of Michigan State University School of Law now.
Okay. And you did go into private practice?
I did. I practiced law for 10 years prior to running for the State House, and served 6 years, 3 two-year terms in the State House, and then was fortunate enough to be elected in 2010 to the Michigan Senate. And then went on with my colleagues. They elected me as the President Pro Tem of the Michigan Senate.
And I understand you're only the second woman in the history of the state to serve
That's
in
correct.
that position.
Uh-huh.
Let's just back it up a little bit. What drew you into politics back when you first ran back in 2004?
Well, Michigan was hemorrhaging jobs. You saw close to 1 million jobs leave the state, and I'd always had a passion for good governance and to make, you know, Michigan a great place to stay and to work and to get a job. And I had 2 minor children at the time, 8 and 5, and I wanted this to be a great state that they could find a job and make a good living here. And I think it's the greatest state in the entire country, and so I wanted to do my part to see Michigan succeed.
When you made that first decision, did you realize it was going to turn into kind of a career for you?
I had no idea that, you know, I just was concentrating on winning my first election, never realizing that, you know, here I would be, you know, 13 years later.
Right. And so you're now really serving your second term, your term limited.
I am. My second term in an 8-year period in the state Senate, that's correct.
Any thoughts while we're on the subject on term limits? Are they a good thing? Should we be considering some changes?
You know, I've always said that the people voted term limits in, and so it would be very self-serving for me to vote on them as a legislator, that it should come from the vote of the people. Term limits, I got here because of term limits, and so, you know, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, but I've always supported, you know, what the will of the people is.
Okay. Let's talk about some issues. One of the big issues, and in a way it kind of crept up on us, at least to the stage it's at, and that's opioid abuse.
That's correct.
And I know you've been really involved in this area. Talk to us about the problem.
Well, it first came on my radar when we had a girl that overdosed of heroin, and I had always kind of believed that heroin was, when I grew up and went to high school, it was something in the back alleys of Hollywood, and it never really kind of infected our schools and our neighborhoods. And and heroin is a illegal form of opioids. And a startling statistic is that the United States is 20% of the world's population, but we consume 80% of the opioids. Wow. And so what happens is people get addicted to the opioids and they turn to the more less expensive models such as heroin. And so that's why we have such a heroin and opioid epidemic. And so there's the governor appointed me to a task force really to address this problem in our state. so that we can save lives and have productive citizens rather than, you know, people that are addicted to medicines. And so we tackled it and came up with several recommendations, certainly education, making, you know, sometimes pain isn't all that bad. Sometimes it's part of the healing process. But I have some bills right now before the state Senate which will make sure that every doctor has to check a patient's prescription history with the MAP system, which has always been in place, but only about 20% of doctors actually check it.
Tell us what that does.
The MAP system it stands for Michigan Automated Prescription System, and that anytime that there is a prescription written, and my bill would make it mandatory so that a doctor could check to see if somebody's doctor shopping, and to really, for a tool for law enforcement to make sure that there's not pill mills. So those are kind of the two problems which making it mandatory with an already existing system would seek to solve. And when Ohio and other states did this, they had a huge success rate in terms of combating the huge opioid problems in their states.
So this will take some new legislative action to accomplish this?
It will take legislative action. The system's already been in place for the last 15 years, and the legislature invested a lot of money to upgrade the system so it was in real-time data. Before, a check would take sometimes 15 minutes. As of April 1st, it takes less than 20 seconds to check it, so it's not that much more cumbersome for doctors to check this system. And so, you know, it should, and with electronic medical records, it should be seamlessly. And this, like I said, will help out in terms of those patients that go from doctor to doctor collecting opioids and then reselling them on the black market.
Okay. We'll talk more about this and some other things in just a minute. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Again, we're talking this morning with State Senator Tanya Shootmaker from the 26th District down in southwestern Michigan. Before we leave the opioid issue, you know, it really is different, isn't it? You know, we're used to people with recreational drugs, and here we have a lot of people that, you know, probably went to a doctor and got a prescription and became hooked on drugs.
Yeah, I was shocked. My son had his wisdom teeth taken out, and I was shocked at the number of painkillers that I got from the dentist or the orthodontist from getting his wisdom teeth taken out. And so, you know, I gave him pain pills for maybe a day or two and then said, you know, no more.
And certainly in some cases the doctor has some culpability, but in many cases they're trying to help. But people do manipulate the system, don't they? And that's kind of what this legislation is designed
Yeah, absolutely.
at. Yeah. Let's talk about another issue that I know you're concerned about, and that's sexual assault on campus. Obviously, it's a serious issue, but how widespread is the problem? Well,
it's very widespread, and I have to give a shout out to the governor's first lady. This really was a pet project of hers in terms of making it very bipartisan, raising the awareness, figuring out how to combat this through education. And so we have a summit each year, which is a very bipartisan. My colleague Rebecca Warren, who's a Democrat from Ann Arbor, she chairs it with me on the Senate side, and then we have two House colleagues, both Republican and Democrat, that along with Sue Snyder put this on each year in a different college campus. And you know, every year I learn something new about this, and as a mother of a child who goes to one of our 15 public universities, you know, it's just so important that not only our young ladies, but also our young men, because it doesn't discriminate between gender, although it's usually women, you know, to raise awareness, to make sure that anytime you have young people and alcohol, that you can put yourself in a dangerous situation as well.
Is this something where legislation is needed, or is it mainly a awareness issue?
It's really, so far, has not materialized in any legislation. We have really just raised awareness and had, you know, some of the most prominent experts throughout the country come in, and because there's a lot of legislation already there in terms of, you know, the Title IX and everything like that, that, you know, and not every problem needs legislation to address it, but sometimes just raising awareness and education and seeing best practices from other states is what needs to be done.
Another issue that I know you've been involved with, it really hasn't received much attention up here, but the sexual assault evidence kit. What's the issue here?
Well, a while back, maybe about 6-7 years ago, a lot of untested kits, thousands of untested kits were found in Detroit from rape kits. And it's not a total disservice to our victims that, you know, those kits were never processed. And so as a result, the governor put forth a task force to really address that, to find out, you know, so that this never happens again, where there's, you know, thousands of untested rape kits, and, you know, you have a lot of people, you know, criminals that are out there perpetrating, and because the kit was never tested, they're still on the streets. And so what we decided to do is you can track a UPS package from when it leaves the store or Amazon, but you can't find out where your rape kit is. And so it's the first in the nation, so I'm very excited about it, that we will be having a tracking number on every rape kit, so that if you're in that unfortunate situation of being a victim of a rape, that you can be able to have some sort of power back to find out where that rape kit is from the second that the sample is collected all the way through the legal process.
Okay. Let's jump to higher education. You're on the Appropriations Committee in that area. Are we providing enough money for our universities?
Well, it's obviously there has been.
Their answer would be no, probably.
Yeah, their answer would be no. Sometimes it's not always money. Certainly, you know, more money is always nice, but you have to live within the confines of your budget, and so that has been true because you've had an explosion of the corrections budget and also the Medicaid budget, and so that really has translated over the last 25, 30 years into less money going to higher education. But one thing that I'm proud with, along with your state senator Casperson, is that we have for the last 6 years invested more money in higher education from the year before. And really what we stopped doing was giving money based upon, you know, politics, and really put metrics and formulas to how the results that we want to see as residents and parents and students from our universities. So I'll give you an example. One of the metrics we have is we want to see less bureaucracy and administrative costs per university per student. And so that's one of the metrics that we use to provide higher education funding formula. We also put in a tuition cap so that universities are spending their tax dollar, or not their tax dollars, but spending the dollars wisely that is made up of the money they get from the state, and also tuition formula, so as to, you know, make sure that they are belt tightening just like the rest of the state of Michigan.
Okay, we have to take one more break. Back with more on the Ryan Report in just 2 minutes. Our guest this morning is State Senator Tanya Shootmaker. Before we leave education, one thing a school like Northern would say, you know, in regard to the current systems, this idea of limiting tuition increases by a percentage works against those schools which already have low tuition rates.
I'm so happy you asked that question, because this year, at the request of Northern and Michigan Tech, I actually agreed with them on that very type of argument. So this is the first year that we went from a percentage to a percentage and a dollar amount, whichever is less. So,
okay.
So we actually did take into that account. So we listened to the great UP schools up here, and we understood that they had a very good point to make.
As you know, there's been a lot of discussion here about the so-called dark store, box store issue.
Right.
And I know the state chamber has been opposed to changing things. What's your stand on this issue?
Well, I know Senator Casperson and down in my area, Representative Maturin, have really been tackling this, because we need to make sure that we have a tax code that is fair and reasonable to all concerned. And you know, in my opinion, that the dark store legislation, and it's more of a problem when there's a huge recession. Right. Now you don't see as many dark stores, so it's not as probably a big of an issue, but you know, there was a way that, you know, a tax tribunal court ruled, and so I do think we need to fix that. hopefully there's a fair and reasonable compromise to be worked out with the retailers and the chambers along with local governments, you know, so that you do have a tax code that is fair and reasonable to all concerned.
I know your assignments have taken you into the electric power area. Have we solved the problem? I mean, I know we passed some legislation, the whole package.
Yeah.
Are we where we want to be now?
Yeah, Michigan did pass another energy package. They passed one about 7-8 years ago, and then we revisited it. And so I think what was important is that we have a source of energy that is, you know, will support our growing economy. Way back when, you didn't have flat screen TVs that used a lot of power. You didn't have a lot of cell phones. So the more technology we get, the more energy we're using, along with hopefully our economy. With increasing and seeing a low unemployment rate means that you have a lot of companies moving into the area, and as a result using more power. So it's important that we forecast and look forward to make sure that we have reliable energy into the future, because the last thing we want is a brownout such as you saw in California about 10-15 years ago, where the economy did not, or the energy did not support the economy.
What Lieutenant Governor Kelly is proposing a part-time legislature. In a sense, you don't have an oar in the water because you're leaving.
That's right.
So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think I've always supported a part-time legislature. I do think, though, that it might be wise to maybe look at extending term limits along with that. But you know, that will be according to the people. It won't be a vote that we will be doing. So I'll leave that to how the ballot language is drafted. But I've always supported a part-time legislature.
Auto insurance rate seems to be on the agenda every year. Is anything going to happen this year?
I certainly hope so. If there's one issue that has really boiled up, and I hear from my constituents, and I personally feel I've got two teenage drivers, well actually I have two drivers, one's not a teenager anymore, but two young drivers in our family, and the high cost of auto rates is something that I hear more and more about. So the Senate passed out a package to deal with, to eliminate the fraud and abuse in the system. It was reasonable reforms. I thought it was something that, you know, was very fair and reasonable to everyone. Unfortunately, there weren't the votes in the House to pass that, but I certainly hope that this term is different and that we get something, because I think more and more, legislators are hearing from the constituents to do something about it.
Okay. Before we go, Attorney General Bill Schuette will be term limited, or is term limited. Some Democrats have thrown their hat in the ring. I understand you could possibly be considering that.
Yes, I'm seriously looking at it.
What do you feel you could bring to that assignment?
Well, certainly, I think I have a great record in the legislature for the last 12 years of protecting what's important. I've been the Legislator of the Year for law enforcement groups, and I think I've got a passion to serve and a love of the law.
Have you made a final decision, or is it still being?
It's still something I'm looking at.
Okay, when do you expect to make a decision?
Oh, probably in the next 2 to 3 months, I would say. I'd have to make a decision one way or another. But, you know, if you look at when Governor Snyder announced for governor, it wasn't until the Super Bowl weekend, so I guess I have some time.
People do stuff so early now, it seems.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Good to have you as our guest.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll be back with more on the Ryan Report after we take a break. You know, each year the Social Security Administration compiles a list of the most popular baby names for the preceding year. And this morning, we're going to check out that list. You know, being around for a long time gives you a very different perspective on names. I mean, when I was growing up, there were names that seemed really old-fashioned. I'm not going to mention any. And I just knew that no one would ever choose those names again. But I was wrong. Some of those names came back big time. This week, we'll look at the most popular names for baby girls. Check out the boys' names on a future show. What was the most popular girl's name in 2016? It's a repeat victory for Emma, which has been #1 for 3 years in a row. Emma is one of those names with an interesting history. It was a very popular name in the early 1900s, kind of fell out of favor in the 60s and 70s, and started a serious comeback around the turn of this century. and now it's been in the top 4 every year since 2002. What other names were popular for girls? Olivia was second. In fact, it's been the runner-up for 3 years in a row, and in the top 7 every year since 2003. Rounding out the top 10, Ava was number 3, followed in order by Sophia, Isabella, Mia, Charlotte, Abigail, Emily, and Harper. Now here's one fact I find kind of interesting. Social Security also compiled a list of the top girls' names for the past century, and none of those names are in the current top 10. What were the top 5 girls' names for the past 100 years? I was surprised to see some, but not by the number 1 name on the list, which is Mary. This is far and away the most popular girl's name of all time. Mary was in the top 10 from 1900 to 1971 and was number 1 for many of those years. Times have changed. Last year, Mary came in at number 127. The other names on the top 5 list for girls in the last century are Patricia at number 2, Jennifer was 3rd, Elizabeth 4th, and Linda 5th. Of course, the problem with names is you can pick one for your child. That's very common right now, but who knows if it will stand the test of time. Even very popular names go out of fashion. For example, on that list of the 5 most popular names in the last 100 years, Linda was number 5. I like the name Linda, and it was in the top 10 from 1940 to 1965. It was number 1 from 1947 to 52. But in 2000, it ranked number 669. People just stopped liking Linda, the name, not the person. In the end, all that really counts is, do you like your name? After you've been around for a long time, we get pretty comfortable being who we are, regardless of what the name popularity lists say. I'll be back in a minute. Before we wrap it up for another Sunday, I do have time to remind you that you can find the latest news anytime at uppermichigansource.com. You can also find this show at that same address. Today's show will be there at about noon tomorrow. Thanks to Senator Tanya Shootmaker for being a part of our show this morning. It's good to get a downstate perspective on the issues on the legislative agenda in Lansing. And thank you for joining us this morning. I look forward to seeing you again next Sunday morning.